You know what nobody's talking about right now? The fact that Putin's so-called unstoppable empire is bleeding out faster than anyone predicted. I'm not talking about some gradual decline here. I'm talking about catastrophic hemorrhaging that NATO officials are calling unsustainable. And here's the catch. The numbers they're revealing are so shocking that even military analysts can't believe what they're seeing. So sit tight, because what I'm about to show you will completely change how you see this war. Vladimir Putin wants you to believe Russia is winning. He wants the world to think his military machine is unstoppable, that Ukraine will eventually crumble under the weight of Russian might. But here's what they're not telling you. As of January 14, 2026, Russia is losing up to 25,000 soldiers every single month. Not wounded, not injured, dead. Let that sink in for a moment. 25,000 human beings erased from existence every 30 days. And this isn't Ukrainian propaganda. These numbers come directly from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who stood before European lawmakers this week and called it exactly what it is: massive and unsustainable. To put this in perspective, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, a war that became their Vietnam, they lost an estimated 15,000 soldiers over 9 years. 9 years. Russia is now matching or exceeding that entire 9-year death toll every single month. The Soviet-Afghan War was considered such a disaster that it contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. Think about that. What took 9 years to destroy the USSR is now happening to Putin's Russia in monthly cycles, and it gets worse. Britain's Ministry of Defense released intelligence this week confirming that Russia has suffered over 1.2 million battlefield casualties since launching its full-scale invasion in February 2022. That's not a typo, 1.2 million. We're talking about a number so astronomical that it's difficult to comprehend. To visualize this, imagine filling every seat in 10 large NFL stadiums with wounded and dead Russian soldiers. That's the scale of carnage we're discussing. Every single day in December 2025, Russia averaged 1,100 soldiers killed or wounded. Every single day. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that in December alone, 35,000 Russian soldiers were eliminated, and these were confirmed with video footage. November saw 30,000. October, 26,000. The trend is clear and terrifying for Moscow. The numbers are escalating month by month. But here's where it gets really interesting. Russia managed to recruit roughly 33,000 new soldiers per month throughout 2025. Do the math with me. They're recruiting 33,000 but losing 35,000 or more. They're not just failing to grow their military, they're shrinking it. This is basic arithmetic that even the Kremlin can't spin away. Ukraine's military intelligence chief Kyrilo Budanov confirmed Russia recruited 403,000 soldiers total in 2025, averaging 33,583 per month. For 2026, Russia planned to increase that slightly to 34,000 per month. But if they're still losing 25,000 killed plus thousands more wounded every month, the math simply doesn't work. Now, you might be thinking, but Russia has a huge population. They can sustain this, right? Wrong. And here's why. Putin has desperately avoided full-scale mobilization because he knows it would be political suicide. The Russian people tolerated this war as long as it didn't touch their lives. Middle-class Muscovites could sip their lattes and pretend nothing was happening, while men from poor rural regions died in Ukrainian fields. But that social contract is breaking down. Russia is now deploying active reserves, pulling territorial defense units meant to protect infrastructure, and equipping them with offensive weapons like howitzers and thermobaric systems. The Institute for the Study of War observed units in Belgorod receiving equipment they would only need for frontline combat operations. This changes everything. When Russia starts pulling reserves designed for homeland defense and throwing them into the Ukrainian meat grinder, you know they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Katerina Stepanenko, a Russia analyst with the Institute for the Study of War, told Business Insider that Moscow is desperately trying to find new recruitment sources without triggering full mobilization. They're offering financial benefits to informal recruiters, sourcing personnel from overseas, including North Korean troops, and manipulating legislation around reserve deployments. Before, Russia just assigned military recruitment centers to do the job. Now, as Stepanenko put it, the Kremlin is asking where else can we squeeze recruits from? That's not the language of a winning military. That's the language of desperation. But let's talk about what Russia is supposedly winning, because Putin's propagandists love to showcase territorial gains. Yes, Russia captured more than 5,600 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory in 2025, their highest gains since the first year of the war. Sounds impressive until you realize that represents less than 1% of Ukraine's total territory. Let me repeat that. After an entire year of offensive operations, after sacrificing over 420,000 soldiers killed and wounded, after burning through enormous quantities of equipment and ammunition, Russia gained 0.8% of Ukraine. They're trading thousands of lives for every village, every field, every kilometer. The primary focus has been the city of Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region, where fighting has been absolutely brutal. Russia has used wave after wave of infantry assaults, what military analysts call human wave tactics, sending groups of soldiers forward with minimal support, knowing most will die, but hoping a few will break through. It's a strategy that hasn't been widely used since World War I, and it's producing World War I casualty rates. The average daily rate of Russian advance in 2025 was 13.24 square kilometers, compared to 9.87 square kilometers in 2024. Yes, that's an increase. But when you factor in the cost, Russia is losing more soldiers per kilometer gained than at any point in this war. It's an exchange rate that no military can sustain indefinitely. And here's something that should terrify military planners in Moscow. Drones have completely changed the nature of warfare. Ukrainian officials estimate that attack drones are responsible for eliminating around 90% of all targets hit on the battlefield. 90%. The proliferation of drone warfare has created what soldiers call a kill zone that extends up to 15 kilometers behind the front lines. This has made battlefield casualty evacuation nearly impossible. Western military doctrine talks about the golden hour, the first 60 minutes after a severe injury, when proper medical treatment determines whether a soldier lives or dies. Ukrainian and Western officers say the golden hour is long gone in this war. Soldiers wounded in the kill zone often can't be evacuated for hours or even days because any rescue attempt draws immediate drone strikes. This means injuries that would be survivable in any other conflict become death sentences in Ukraine. For Russia, with its notoriously poor battlefield medical care, the situation is even worse. Russia has responded by massively expanding its drone forces. They created separate drone units numbering 80,000 personnel in 2025 and plan to double that to 165,000 in 2026. By 2030, they aim to have 210,000 drone operators. Ukraine did the same thing, ramping up drone production throughout 2025. President Zelensky announced they reached their target of producing 1,000 intercept drones per day by year's end. That's 30,000 drones per month designed specifically to hunt other drones. This is warfare evolution happening in real time, and both sides are locked in a technological arms race where humans become increasingly vulnerable. But the bleeding isn't just military. Russia's economy is hemorrhaging too. New sanctions targeting Russia's oil sector are intensifying a cash squeeze that analysts warn could trigger a banking crisis in 2026. Oil and gas revenues dropped more than 25% due to sanctions and a weakening ruble. The Russian central bank has hiked interest rates to levels not seen in decades, trying to control inflation that's making everyday life increasingly difficult for ordinary Russians. The price of stability, as one analysis put it, is becoming unbearable. Economic forecasters project Russia's growth at just 1.4% in 2026, barely enough to cover war costs, let alone improve civilian life. Meanwhile, the defense budget consumes an ever larger share of government spending. Money that could go to schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and pensions is instead being burned in Ukrainian fields. The Atlantic Council warned that if Western countries tighten sanctions at the right moment, Russia's economic plan could backfire, triggering runaway inflation and further slowdown. The Kremlin has rewired the Russian economy for war production, converting civilian factories to military use, but this creates its own problems. You can't eat artillery shells. You can't drive a tank to work. An economy geared entirely toward war production leaves civilian needs unmet, creating shortages and resentment. And then there's Ukraine's masterstroke, the Kursk offensive. In August 2024, Ukrainian forces did something unprecedented in modern warfare. They invaded Russia. For the first time since World War II, foreign troops seized Russian territory. They pushed into Kursk Oblast, a region on Russia's western border, and at their peak controlled over 1,000 square kilometers. By November 2024, Russia had clawed back more than 40% of that territory, but Ukraine still holds significant portions. Why does this matter? Because it completely shattered Putin's narrative. He told the Russian people this was a special military operation happening safely away from Russian soil. Suddenly, Ukrainian tanks were rolling through Russian villages. Russian civilians were being evacuated from their homes. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Ukrainian officials said the goals were to inflict damage on Russia's military, capture Russian troops for prisoner exchanges, push artillery out of range of Ukrainian cities, and divert Russian forces from other fronts. They succeeded on all counts. Russia was forced to pull thousands of troops from offensive operations in eastern Ukraine to defend their own territory. The Kursk offensive proved that Russia's borders are not impenetrable, that Putin cannot protect Russian soil, and that Ukraine can take the fight to the aggressor. It was a strategic and propaganda victory that continues to pay dividends. But Russia hasn't given up. Putin ordered his military to expand operations in 2026, seeking to capture the entirety of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson oblasts, 3 regions Russia has claimed to annex. This means more offensives, more casualties, more resources burned. Russia is also experimenting with new tactics. They've introduced wired fiber optic drones that are immune to electronic jamming. They've shifted from large mechanized assaults to infiltration tactics, using small teams of 2 soldiers to establish positions before reinforcements arrive. These tactics enabled them to capture 2/3 of Pokrovsk by late 2025. They're adapting, learning, trying to reduce casualties while maintaining pressure. But adaptation comes with costs and limits. While Russia makes these tactical adjustments, Ukraine is doing the same. General Oleksandr Syrsky announced they're forming special units designed to detect and destroy Russian drone units and operators. They're improving training for new troops to counter Russian infiltration tactics. Both sides are locked in this evolutionary arms race, constantly adapting to each other's innovations. The difference is that Russia is playing offense in a war of attrition they can't win, while Ukraine is playing defense on home soil with Western backing. Let's talk about the long-range war, because that's where Russia has tried to break Ukrainian will. In 2025, Russia launched 54,000 long-range attack drones and 1,900 missiles against Ukrainian cities. 54,000. They've targeted power plants, heating facilities, hospitals, apartment buildings. The goal is to make life unbearable for Ukrainian civilians, to freeze them in winter, to break their spirit. On January 6, 2026, a Russian drone struck a hospital in Kyiv, killing a patient. The same day, they hit heating and electricity plants in Kharkiv. During the first week of 2026, Russia launched 789 drones and 10 missiles against Ukrainian cities. But here's the thing. Ukraine shot down 83% of those drones and 1 missile. They've built one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world through sheer necessity. Every failed strike represents wasted resources for Russia and proof that Ukraine can defend itself. Russia even introduced a new innovation on January 12, deploying Shahed drones equipped with man-portable air defense systems designed to shoot down the Ukrainian aircraft hunting drones. It's drone-on-drone warfare at a level never before seen. But each innovation requires resources, training, and money that Russia increasingly doesn't have. And speaking of resources, let's address the elephant in the room: international support for Ukraine. The United States has been Ukraine's largest military supporter, but with political changes in Washington, questions loom about continued aid. European allies, including France and the UK, have pledged troops and security guarantees. NATO has reaffirmed support. But there's uncertainty, and uncertainty is Putin's friend. He's betting that Western resolve will crack before Russian resources run out. He's calculating that democracies with short attention spans will tire of supporting Ukraine while his authoritarian system can endure indefinitely. But here's what Putin isn't counting on: the cost of losing. If Russia fails in Ukraine, if Putin cannot deliver the victory he promised, the political consequences within Russia could be catastrophic for him. The Russian people have tolerated enormous costs believing in eventual victory. What happens when that victory never comes? What happens when hundreds of thousands died for nothing? When pensions are slashed and inflation soars for a war that accomplished nothing? History shows that authoritarian leaders can survive many things, but not perceived failure in wars they started. The Soviet Union didn't collapse because of Western military defeat. It collapsed because the Afghan war exposed the system's incompetence and drained resources needed elsewhere. The parallels are striking and should terrify Putin. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to evolve and innovate. President Zelensky appointed Mikhailo Fedorov, the former first deputy prime minister deeply involved in drone production and digitalization, as defense minister in January 2026. This signals Ukraine's strategy. Embrace technology, modernize warfare, outthink rather than just outfight the enemy. They're not trying to match Russia soldier for soldier. They're trying to make every Ukrainian soldier more effective through technology, training, and tactics. It's asymmetric warfare at its finest. David finding ways to bring down Goliath not through brute strength, but through precision and innovation. The appointment of Fedorov represents a generational and philosophical shift. Old guard military thinking is being replaced by tech-savvy innovation. Ukraine is becoming a laboratory for 21st century warfare, and the lessons being learned will influence military doctrine for decades. NATO countries are watching and learning. Western defense contractors are studying Ukrainian innovations. The next generation of military technology is being forged in Ukrainian fields right now. So where does this leave us? Putin's empire isn't just bleeding, it's hemorrhaging at a rate that cannot be sustained. The math doesn't lie. 25,000 killed per month, 1.2 million total casualties, 420,000 lost in 2025 alone, economic strain increasing, international isolation deepening, domestic pressure building. Meanwhile, Ukraine remains standing, battered, yes, exhausted, certainly, but standing, fighting, innovating, surviving. And survival in this context is victory. Putin needed quick victory. He needed Ukraine to collapse in days or weeks. Every month that passes is another month of unsustainable losses. Every kilometer Russia gains costs thousands of lives they can't afford to lose. Every economic quarter brings more strain. Every diplomatic failure increases isolation. The breaking point is coming. When it arrives is the question, not if. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said it plainly. These losses are unsustainable. Military analysts agree. Economic forecasters agree. The only people not admitting it are in the Kremlin, and even they must know the truth in private moments. This changes everything about how we should view this conflict. This isn't a story of Russian military might steamrolling Ukraine. This is a story of a declining power desperately trying to reclaim imperial glory while destroying itself in the process. This is a story of miscalculation on an epic scale. Putin thought he could repeat Crimea, a quick operation with minimal resistance. Instead, he started a war that is consuming his military, his economy, and ultimately his legacy. The Soviet Union collapsed after losing 15,000 soldiers in Afghanistan over 9 years. Russia is losing that many every month in Ukraine. How long before the same political and social forces that destroyed the USSR visit the Russian Federation? How long before Russian mothers refuse to send their sons? Before Russian workers refuse to tolerate poverty wages while oligarchs prosper? Before Russian soldiers refuse to die for meaningless villages? The signs are appearing. Recruitment is struggling to match casualties. Economic growth is anemic. Sanctions are biting. International isolation is complete except for fellow pariah states. The information warfare Russia once dominated is failing as their lies become too obvious. When Russia falsely claimed Ukraine tried to assassinate Putin in late December, even Donald Trump publicly said he didn't believe it. When your propaganda is so bad that even sympathetic leaders call it out, you've lost the information war. So what should we take away from all this? First, never underestimate the power of a nation fighting for its existence versus a nation fighting for imperial ambition. Ukraine is fighting for survival. Russia is fighting for conquest. That asymmetry matters profoundly in morale, determination, and willingness to endure hardship. Second, modern warfare has evolved in ways that favor defenders with technology. Drones, precision weapons, and real-time intelligence create killing fields that make offensive operations extraordinarily costly. Russia is learning this lesson in blood. Third, economic and demographic realities eventually overpower propaganda. You can lie about victories, you can suppress bad news, you can control media narratives, but you cannot hide empty chairs at dinner tables. You cannot hide inflation at the grocery store. You cannot hide factory closures and pension cuts. Reality eventually penetrates even the most controlled information environment. Fourth, Western support matters enormously, but Ukrainian determination matters more. All the weapons in the world mean nothing without the will to use them effectively. Ukraine has demonstrated that will beyond any doubt. And finally, this war will define the 21st century's geopolitical order. If Ukraine prevails, it sends a message that territorial conquest through military force is no longer viable in the modern world. If Russia prevails, it sends the opposite message and encourages authoritarians everywhere. The stakes could not be higher. So pay attention, stay informed. Don't let this conflict fade into background noise. What's happening in Ukraine right now is determining what kind of world we'll live in for decades to come. Putin's empire is bleeding, and the flow is accelerating. The question isn't whether it will collapse, but how much damage it will do on the way down and whether Ukraine can hold on long enough to see it through. Based on everything we've examined today, the numbers, the trends, the economic data, the military assessments, I'd bet on Ukraine, not because they're stronger in raw numbers, but because they're fighting for something worth fighting for, because they're adapting faster, and because Russia simply cannot sustain these losses indefinitely. No military in human history has sustained these casualty rates without eventually breaking. Russia will not be the exception. So keep watching, keep paying attention, share this information. Make sure people understand what's really happening beyond the headlines and propaganda. The truth is, Putin's unstoppable empire was always a facade, and Ukraine is tearing it down brick by bloody brick. The world is watching an empire bleed out in real time, and history is being written in Ukrainian fields. Make sure you're on the right side of it. If you found this valuable, hit that subscribe button because I'll keep bringing you the stories and analysis that mainstream media won't. Drop a comment telling me what you think. Will Russia's breaking point come in 2026, or can Putin hold on longer? And share this with anyone who needs to understand what's really happening in this war. Stay informed, stay engaged, and I'll see you in the next one.